Hello and good evening. Welcome to the Amuse Singers world premiere of Set Myself Free, a newly commissioned work by Melissa Dunphy and Jacqueline Goldfinger to commemorate the centennial of the women's suffrage movement today, August 18th, here in the United States. I'm Phillip Cheah, music director of Amuse, coming to you live from New York City, and I'm delighted you're able to join us for this very special event. Tonight, I'll be joined by composer Melissa Dunphy and librettist Jacqueline Goldfinger for a brief roundtable discussion about the piece, a behind-the-scenes look at the process of putting it all together, as well as the thoughts on the suffrage movement. Following the premiere, Melissa, Jacqueline, and I will be moderating a Q&A session. For all of you watching right now, please use the chat function on YouTube and Facebook at any point during the broadcast to write ads with your comments and questions, which we will then address during the Q&A. Please also stay tuned for a surprise appearance by a very special guest coming up after the video presentation. The 19th Amendment, which guarantees that the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex, was passed in 1919, first by the House of Representatives on May 21st, followed by the Senate 2 weeks later on June 4th. But it wasn't until the following year that the amendment was finally ratified by Congress. On August 18th, 1920, which is today's date, Tennessee became the 36th state to ratify the amendment, thus obtaining the agreement of 3/4 of the states to secure adoption. Secretary of State Bainbridge Colby certified the ratification on August 26, 1920, changing the face of the American electorate forever. The remaining 12 of the 48 states that existed at the time of the amendment's adoption subsequently did ratify the amendment, though many of the ratifications took place much later, mostly in the 1950s and 70s, with the final one by Mississippi in March of 1984. Like so many performing arts organizations here in New York City, across the country, and all around the world, Amuse was forced to suspend its season and postpone its final concert, which was to have taken place 2 months ago in June, when the city started sheltering in place back in the spring. The program for this concert, an exploration of the different facets of femininity, was also going to feature the centerpiece of our season, this newly commissioned work, Set Myself Free. We were resigned to put our performance of this piece on hold until such time when we can all safely gather again in person to sing. However, the Muse board and I quickly realized that the significance of both the work and the occasion were far too important to be passed up this year. As a women's ensemble based in New York, Amuse is part of the complex and intricate fabric of the early women's suffrage efforts which took place here, like the Seneca Falls Convention of 1848 and the formation of the National Women's Suffrage Association in 1869 here in New York City. So, we decided to embrace the zeitgeist, COVID-19 be damned, and pivot to a virtual performance instead. Tonight's premiere is the culmination of months of work, from the singers having to individually learn and record their parts, both audio and video, to the post-production work by our incredibly creative team. And on a personal note, trying to figure out how to do a home broadcast from scratch. I also want to point out that this virtual performance marks the first occasion where singers from all across Amuse's entire history, both current members and alumni, have come together to participate. I can't think of a more meaningful enterprise with which to bring together the generations of women in our ensemble from the past 16 years. In a moment, I'll bring in our two guests, Melissa Dunphy and Jacqueline Goldfinger, but first, let me introduce them briefly to you. Born to refugee parents and raised in Australia, Melissa Dunphy immigrated to the United States in 2003 and has since become an award-winning and acclaimed composer specializing in vocal, political, and theatrical music. Her works have been hailed as brilliant and exquisite, the very model of sincerity with a beautiful, clear, and direct language. Rachel Maddow called her seminal work, The Gonzalez Cantata, the coolest thing you've ever seen. Her music has been performed all over the country by ensembles like Chanticleer, Cantus, the St. Louis Chamber Chorus, Choral Arts Philadelphia, Boston Choral Ensemble, and many others. She has received awards from ASCAP, the Lotte Lehmann Foundation, Boston Metro Opera, and she's the recipient of a 2020 Opera America Discovery Grant for Alice Tierney, a new opera commissioned by Oberlin Conservatory with a libretto by our very own Jacqueline Goldfinger, and set to premiere in 2023. Melissa is also an amateur archaeologist and co-hosts the popular podcast The Bog House with her husband Matt about their adventures in Philadelphia colonial archaeology. Jacqueline Goldfinger is a writer, playwright, librettist, and dramaturg, best known for her work in the Southern Gothic genre. She has been nominated for the Weisberger Award, Blackburn Prize, Tate Black Prize, and Foote Prize, and she has won the Yale Drama Prize, Barrymore Award, Philadelphia Critics Award, and many others. Her plays have been on the Kilroy's list twice. They have been developed and produced at theaters including the Kennedy Center, the Seattle Public, La Mama here in New York, the National Theatre in London, Disquiet in Lisbon, and the Court Theatre in New Zealand. Her work is published by Yale Press, Concord Theatricals, Playscripts, Smith & Krause, and the Blackbird Literary Journal. Please join me in welcoming Melissa Dunphy and Jacqueline Goldfinger. Hi, Melissa. Hi, Jacqueline. Hi.
Hi.
Oh,
Hello.
Thank you for being here with us.
It's so good to. Oh, of course. It's so good to be here with you. And I mean, I wish I could be in person and give you a hug. And thank you for the opportunity to create this work for Amuse and meet everyone in the choir. But this is the next best thing. And in the current circumstances, the best we can do. So thank you so much for putting all of this together.
Thank you, Jacqueline, for being here as well. I mean, both of you, coming in from Philadelphia. So good to have you here. So, Melissa, what drew you to this project? What's the process like for you in coming up with the music for Set Myself Free?
Okay, so generally when I am working on a brand new choral piece, I go text first. I don't know if it's because of my own background in theater or acting or what, but the way that I tend to compose vocal music is I need to be inspired by a text before anything happens. So Jacqueline and I just started working together for the first time. We had actually been friends for a number of years trying to find a point, a project, something that we could work on together. And it feels like 2020 is the year when it's all happening. Like we're collaborating a whole bunch, which is amazing. So when you first approached me to write a piece for Amuse, and of course, I'm an unabashed feminist, and I'm, also, I think, very politically minded. And, here in 2020, we have a major election happening, and voting rights, and it is very much on the mind. I think it would be on our minds even if we weren't celebrating this important centenary. But I didn't want to. I wanted to sort of have a modern reflection of that. So, I wanted to approach a new poet and commission some new poetry. So I was so happy to ask Jackie to write something for me.
That's amazing. Jackie, I can't believe that Set Myself Free is your first libretto. What an honor and thrill it is for all of us at Amuse to be able to sing this powerful and moving text. What was it like for you to craft something that had to at once capture such an enormous concept, but also make it accessible and personal?
I felt incredibly blessed to have Melissa as a collaborator for this first try, because I'd written poetry and I'd written heightened language for performance, but never for choral work. And so having a guide was really wonderful. And we looked at a lot of the Amuse work that's available, because your work is so wonderful. We pulled poetry, we pulled monologues, we pulled speeches, and we tried to look at the suffragist movement both as a historical moment in time, but also in the terms of what does it mean today, which is especially important because unfortunately that original movement was not as intersectional as it could have been.
Right.
And so we wanted to focus the work on what the women had in common and how they gathered the strength and how they fought
That's
and
amazing.
moved forward.
I mean, a little later on, I'm going to have you read the text for everybody before we hear the piece. But I just think it's amazing how you captured not only just the struggles, but the successes, but also the successes that's still to come. You know, this is a continuing struggle for all of us, even today. I mean, I think the pandemic has really exposed all the social faults that we see, right, with racial inequality and the wealth gap, LGBT rights, and obviously, you know, women's rights and minorities' rights as well. So right, and so
Totally.
and you know, I'm speaking to women, but also a woman of color with Melissa too. So I think there's so much resonance with, you know, the text that you set. And Melissa, I think the music that you've put to this text gives it almost kind of a rallying anthem feel. I don't know.
That was definitely what I was going for. Yeah. Because to me, you know, this isn't a kind of like done and done
Right.
kind of anniversary, you know, like, oh, we achieved equality. We're done. It's good. You know, we can all just participate. Yeah. Check. We're you know, cross it off the list. We're fine. Like, this is a really important anniversary, but, you know, so my family comes from China. One half of my biological family comes from China, and immigrants born in China could not vote in the United States until 1943, whether you were a woman or a man. You know, the Magnuson Act had to repeal the Chinese Exclusion Act before anyone born in China was allowed to vote in America. So, and this is despite the fact that there were actually Chinese American suffragettes, you know, fighting for the right for women to vote in 1919. And then, of course, you know, Black women were discriminated against and right. continue to be discriminated against, of course. But we have the 1965 Voting Rights Act, which, you know, enshrined that racial discrimination shouldn't happen. Whether that's actually been achieved is another completely different matter. But this is all to say that, like, yeah, 1919 is a really important date. But for me, I wanted to write a piece that indicated that this is an ongoing struggle, and it was an ongoing struggle then. You know, each victory is not the final victory. It's a small change that, you know, we keep clawing our way forward to make a more perfect union in this country. No. And we're not there yet, but it's important to both celebrate the progress that we make and also to go forward and continue making things better for the next generation. And I think, yeah, 2020 has totally crystallized that mission for
that's exactly it. I mean, when we were working on this piece for this project, and I think we would have done the same thing too had we worked on this for live performance. But, you know, we started doing all this research to the movement, and, you know, we think of Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Stanton as kind of, you know, these paragons for the movement, but we discovered to our horror how much we didn't know about the suppression of minority voices and colored voices in this thing. That this almost Orwellian trope of, you know, all people are equal, but some are more equal than others, was still, you know, haunting a movement that's supposed to be equal, achieve better equality for everybody. So I think, you know, this has really sparked a very necessary conversation for all of us doing this, and you know, we have you to thank for giving us this creative process too. I want to ask the both of you, at what point did you, I mean, obviously you go through drafts of pieces, both the poetry and the music. At what point did you find that you had arrived at what felt like kind of the right ending point for both the poem and the music?
Jackie, do you want to take it from the text side?
Sure. So I know I'm done when Melissa tells me I'm done. Which can be anywhere from 2 to 6 drafts, just depending on, because we're working on a number of other pieces together now. And so depending on what she needs, it can be anywhere from 2 to 6 drafts. But what's wonderful for me, and one of the reasons that I love working with other people and other collaborators, is because every collaborator brings a new layer of excellence, new ideas, new depth. And so I love that, yes, technically because of how Melissa works, we start with the libretto. It's never done until you push play tonight, that everyone has had a chance to be in conversation, whether that's literal conversation or conversation through the music, conversation through rehearsals. So for me, I love that it's not really done until you push play
That's
tonight
amazing.
on the video.
Yeah. I definitely feel the same way. And again, this is like the difference between the virtual premiere environment and what I'm missing most of all is usually at premieres, my favorite place to sit is at the back of the hall, so I can look out over the audience and see how they're reacting by the way they breathe and the way they, nudge their neighbor, or, they turn a page in the book because they're like, did I really hear that lyric correctly? And you see how people are engaged. And we're missing that. So if you're out there, the only way we can interact with you is by chat. So please, if you have questions or comments, you should put them in the chat box so that we get some feedback. But yeah, I totally agree. Like, yeah, it's a collaboration with Jackie, but it's a collaboration with the choir as well. And all of these layers, every singer, the conductor, everything is added to that piece of art. We have in classical music, we're very sort of like the composer is the venerated genius that creates everything. And that's not true at all. So for me, it's like, once I have a text that I've decided I'm going to work on, I will find the music in that text. Like sometimes the lines in the text will immediately speak their music to me in a way. I know that sounds very woo-woo, but that's sort of how it feels to me. And other times it can be really fun to get a text that isn't immediately musical, but requires me to kind of chisel out how to make it work in a musical setting. And I actually find that like sometimes the most challenging texts can be the most fun to work with. This text really immediately spoke a lot of like rhythmic language to me. There's a lot of, and you'll hear it actually in the premiere tonight, those of you listening, there's a lot of like consonants that create rhythmic elements to it and these short lines. And so that instantly sets up how I'm going to begin to set it. And then it's a journey, right? For like, where are we going to go and where are we going to end? So I'm not going to say anything more than that. I think that I'm hoping the music speaks for itself and takes the audience on that journey too. And if it didn't,
they're going to be taken on this amazing journey. I'm very sure of that. I actually love that you mentioned the word chisel. It brought to mind the image of Michelangelo, who said that the statue is already there. He just to chisel away from the rock to review. Right? And so I like that it's this thing that's kind of like preconceived already, and it just has to be exposed to the world. And I love that. But I also, on that same concept, you reminded me, because we've been in, I think, COVID for so long that I feel like we've been in this forever. But I actually almost forgot that in a regular commissioning process, when we're doing a new piece, I would be in contact with the composer or the librettist sometimes, constantly during the rehearsal process to talk about, can we adjust this this note? What do you think about this thing? Actually, I think I got back to you early in the process saying, can we try taking up a step, because I felt like it was a little low. And that was something that was just my instinct that you also agreed with. But I realized I missed out on the process of working through the piece in rehearsal and then getting back with feedback to you, or to the chorus and whatnot. And one of the things about a virtual performance that I'm glad that we're doing this, and I think I mentioned to you, and Jacqueline, I don't know if I mentioned to you before, but we are hoping that when we can meet together in person to give an actual live performance of the piece as it was conceived. So that is definitely on the docket. But I think, given the circumstances, we've managed to, if I can say so myself, put together a pretty good attempt at the piece virtually. but you miss that interaction, right? You miss the energy of the back and forth. We've approached this piece as if it's the final word, and it's not always the case, right? We can always tweak and move, and like you said, Melissa, when you perform it, we miss the audience's energy. We miss the gasps of air when they hear a chord for the first time or hear the text breathe a certain way. And I think that's something that we're missing from a virtual performance. But alternatively, I think with this performance, we also get to have a way of bringing together disparate elements. This virtual performance, as you know from other performances, was recorded individually. We had 20 singers recording their pieces of music in a quiet space in their homes, which is really hard in New York, if you can imagine, and trying to sing your own line, and then just hoping that all your line will be put of someone else's line, and will all come together. And there's a lot of trust and faith put out there in the ether, as it were, right? So, Jacqueline, I just wanted to mention that in your text, which all of us love. I mean, you've taken all these images. Lipstick is the one image that comes out so clearly in this text, and when we hear the piece, the imagery of lipstick will come back again, sort of transformed. But I remember when one of the singers was mentioning when she was filming the video for this video, that she had to think about whether she had to put on lipstick for the video. She had to think about the way she was placing herself in front of the camera, and all these thoughts that go through a woman's mind doing that, and how your text suddenly took on this meta level, and it just haunted them so much because they were singing about sort of overcoming these obstacles that the lipstick and the dress is putting onto them, and yet here they are thinking about these very same issues when in front of the camera. Was that something that you hope would happen when the singers sing this text and approach it, that they'll be thinking of it and how it affects them personally?
Absolutely. How it affects them personally, how they prepare, how they present themselves, what is considered appropriate presentation given you have an all-female choir. Melissa and I, when we were doing our research for this piece, discussed a lot about the commodification of women and women's bodies, which is why we start with that in the piece, because we feel like there has been less commodification of women's bodies, but it's still there. And for sure, before suffrage, the only thing you had to trade on was your looks and was your physicality. That was your vote. That was your money. That was your commerce. That was your power. And then as we move through to women becoming more disenchanted with what they have to do physically, then the lyrics degrade a little into thinking of how can we use these things that we have on hand to fight. And then that's when you get into a lot of the very rhythmic language, because that's when they started marching, right? You read about the marching in the streets. The marches in Philadelphia and New York and everywhere in the country. DC, absolutely. And so we get into a bit of a marching rhythm in the middle of the text. And then as they march and they gain self-power, they learn to use the things that oppressed them in order to share their voices. So they use the lipstick to paint signs. They use the lipstick to do things. They use what's on hand. There's a beautiful speech that Stacey Abrams gave about what was happening in Georgia in terms of voter suppression, and how one of the ways that she works is finding out what do people already have in their community that you can subvert and capitalize on. And that was a speech that I think resonated with both Melissa and I. So we were trying to, yes, reflect the journey of these women in the past, but also create a resonance with what we're seeing now in terms of voter suppression and voting rights.
Well, speaking of text, Jacqueline, I was wondering if you could take this opportunity now to read your poem out loud, and then we will play the music and have the premiere of this piece.
Thank you, Philip. Set myself free. Suck in stomach, wet plump lips, paint myself until I can't see myself, pleasing you. I'm tired of my face, waist, thighs, so tired of being the un-me, not me, the never good enough to be really seen. I scrub the shame out of my eyes, what to do with this paint left behind. Make signs, slogans, screaming, your rights and mine, laws repainted to better align with the dreams our foremothers bought on back and bent knee. They knew the price of liberty. They paid day after day so I could repaint the Constitution and set myself free.
Beautiful. Thank you, Jacqueline. And now, ladies and gentlemen, here is the world premiere of Set Myself Free.
Suck in stomach, wet plump lips. 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 Hate myself until I can't see myself. See myself. Hate myself until I can't see myself. Pleasing you, pleasing sucking stomach, wet plump lips, sucking stomach, wet plump. I'm tired, wet plump lips, sucking stomach, face, waist, thighs, so tired, wet plump lips, sucking stomach, wet plump lips.
Wow.
Yay! Thank you so much for doing such an amazing job. Thank you to everyone in the choir and in like 16 years of the choir who came back and did such an amazing job singing that. I mean, wow. Thank you.
Thank you.
So
we're so grateful to you, the both of you, for giving the world such an amazing anthem for all of us. What was it like to, you guys wrote this so long ago. What was it like to now finally hear it after so many months of having it in your head for so long, and to hear it like physicalized like this?
It's enormous. It's enormous. I mean, especially because I haven't heard a choir singing my stuff in the longest time. You know what I mean? Like singing a new piece of music. It's been months. I mean, we've all been stuck in our houses. So there's like that aspect. But there's also, I mean, I talk about this every time with premiering a brand new piece. When you're writing a new piece of music, it's either you're relying on the voices in your head, which we all have as composers especially, or you're relying on the MIDI that's coming out of your computer that is like synthesizing voices, which is directly from hell and sounds absolutely nothing like the human voice. It sounds like a seal going, kind of like horrific synthesized noises. So my husband talks about this, Matt talks about this all the time, where, he has to put up with listening to MIDI coming out of my office day in, day out that just sounds like trash. And then, he sees something that sounds vaguely the same harmonically, but suddenly it's this gorgeous choir of real human voices who, are singing things in harmony with each other, and just the breathing together and the telling of the story is all there. And the text, of course, is now with it as well. And it makes this huge difference. He gets like really verklempt over it as well. So yeah, it's a huge, I tell people all the time, it's like being a composer, that's the biggest high, is when you see other people bringing something to life that you cooked up in your head, in your pajamas in front of your computer. I imagine that must be the same for playwrights, right, Jackie?
Absolutely. It's a bizarre, godlike feeling.
Yes. It totally is.
I made them say these things. It's a high.
Since this is the first time you set a libretto, was it interesting to hear it set to music? Did the addition of music change the way you heard the text? Did it enhance it, or like what was that like for you?
Oh my God, it was amazing. It definitely enhanced the experience. I had enjoyed choral music and classical music in the past and opera, but I'd never had my words and associated. And it was just, they sound so much better. Like composers do such an amazing job. I'm like, oh my God, can you now set everything that I write to music? Like, make me sound so much better than I actually am. I love it. And also there's, I feel like for certain bits of libretto or poetry, the repetition, it's like when you just speak the words, you're trying to get people to go deeper, but they can't. And the music allows people to access a deeper place within themselves. And so it becomes almost a meditation that unlocks a deeper enlightenment, which is
one
just
of the
gorgeous.
words, and this is for both of you, one of the words that stands out to me so much, and for everybody when we first were learning it, is the term foremothers. I mean, that just bam came out because we're so used to hearing the patriarchal version of that word, that term. What does it mean to the both of you as women? And do you envision yourself, Jacqueline, using that term again in the future with other pieces?
Absolutely. I actually went to Agnes Scott College, which is a women's college in Atlanta. And so we always referenced our foremothers. we either said foremothers or foremothers and forefathers,
Right.
or four people when we're talking about some of our non-binary history. So for me, it was not a shock. So when I started using that in public, I actually used it in a play a while ago first. People, it like blew people's minds. And that was so exciting to give people new vocabulary, something that had always been a part of my consciousness since I was 18. But to give them those words and to see how empowered it made them feel. I'll definitely keep using that terminology. I think that it really helps people connect with who we are as a
Melissa,
nation.
when you said that text, what did it mean for you? How did it resonate with you?
I mean, as you know, as I say, I am an unabashed feminist. I went to an all-girls school growing up, and I, you know, I have a really strong mom who I tell people, you know, my mom created me, like not just literally, but you know, I am the product of her parenting and her personality and you know that kind of imprint. I wanted her to give me away at my wedding, and my dad threw a fit, so I walked myself down the aisle instead. So that's
Right,
kind of where
right.
I come from, you know. And it is interesting because you know you mentioned at the top of the show my interest in colonial history, and one of the things about coming at colonial history from a material objects kind of perspective, like digging pots out of the ground, is you're much more connected to all of the people who would have used those pots, and so often you know you're touching things that women used, you know, because that was one of their roles at that time. And it really put in sharp relief for me the way we tell history as like our founding fathers, you know, and these men that created our history. But it's like none of that would have happened without our founding mothers. And here we are in the 21st century, and we're trying to tell those stories in more ways than one. Our next project that Jackie and I are collaborating on, this opera, is telling the story of another woman, you know, a real woman in history. So I feel like this is something that sort of has come up a lot. It may be for me also a case of being a woman in an industry that is majority male. And thinking from very early on in my career, very hard about what would classical music be like if we had more music written by women, you know, in the last 600 years. If more women had been encouraged to compose, if more women's stories had been told, like, would it sound different? How would we think about music differently? You know, would we have this very hierarchical system of classical music education in place if we had distributed that and sort of, you know, taken that apart at some point? So, but you know, no time like the present,
indeed.
right? So,
I mean, what you just said also reminded me that the same thing happens with, you know, minorities. I mean, if Black history were taught in a way that's not taught like the way it's right now, would we be approaching this whole thing much more differently too, you know? Speaking of connections, we have a question from one of our many viewers from all over the world. We have viewers from Buenos Aires, Chile, Brooklyn, which feels like a part of the world, New York anyway. Kathleen Burke asks, how much more connected did you both feel to the women's struggle, which persists still in many ways, after having collaborated on this piece?
Jackie?
I felt more connected, especially to my mother. My mother worked for years on civil rights issues. And so, you know, she had pictures in her office of the early feminists. And so for me, while that history had always been a part of just the culture I grew up in, being able to write about it made me feel more connected to them, but also more connected to my own mother, who is out there watching tonight. Hi, Mom. And she was really thrilled to hear that this was happening, because this history is something that she has always been really trying to impart to people throughout her life. So it's been a lovely experience.
Wonderful.
For me, I think one of the things that's really interesting, I'm an immigrant. I came to America when I was 23 from Australia, and a lot of my art, my music making, my composing has been centered on my discovery of America, whether it's the history, the culture, the politics, because I'm coming at it as a new person. And so things that, natural born Americans might be completely used to and take for granted, I'm like, wait, whoa, what? Hold up. I need to explore that. That's mind blowing. Have you thought about this? And yeah, it's interesting to me because America, in some ways, was founded on these amazing ideals of equality, right? But it was one of the last Western countries to give the vote to women. Like Australia had women beat America by 20 years or more, on that front. So we want so badly to be this beacon of equality that leads the world, but we're also behind on many issues, and we have so many competing forces in this country. And I think this centenary particularly has made me really think about that conflict, that dissonance in America, and how we're still living with it in so many different areas of our society.
Conversation that we need to keep having moving forward. I want to hold to that thought because we have a lot more to talk about. But earlier this evening, I had mentioned that we have a surprise guest on this broadcast. And I just want to now take this opportunity, it's my privilege and honor, to present the Lieutenant Governor of the state of New York, Kathy Hochul, who is also the chair of the New York State Women's Suffrage 100th Anniversary Commemoration Commission. And she has this very special message recorded for us.
Hi, I'm Lieutenant Governor Kathy Hochul. I want to send my heartfelt congratulations to Melissa Dunphy, Jacqueline Goldfinger, the Amuse Singers, and everyone who made the debut of Set Myself Free possible tonight. During my regular visits to Seneca Falls, the birthplace of the women's rights movement, I was often struck by the palpable anger revealed in the words of the Declaration of Sentiments. The women of 1848 were fed up. They had it with being treated as no more than the property of their husbands. That anger was a catalyst for a movement that took 72 years to be successful. So I thank you for immortalizing their stories in the beautiful sounds and images that together create a powerful retelling of the women's suffrage movement. It was also a movement in which women of color played a key role in making successful, but for too long their stories were never shared. Harriet Tubman, the tiny conductor on the Underground Railroad, was finally recognized by Hollywood this past year. She was also a suffragist, as was Sojourner Truth, and women like Mary Talbot of Buffalo and Hester C. Jeffries of Rochester were on the forefront of the voting rights movement. They experienced society's rejection of their value by virtue of being both black and female. Imagine if the women's rights movement of the 19th and 20th centuries had been more racially inclusive from the start. Yet for women of color, the right to vote would not be fully theirs until the Voting Rights Act of 1965. So what can we learn from these early activists that is relevant to the unfinished business of today? It boils down to this: changing the status quo means refusing to accept it. We've been rejecting the status for nearly 2 centuries, yet every instinct in my bones tell me we are at a transformative moment in our history, and the opportunity to enact bold, lasting changes is upon us. And that thought fills me with hope. Momentum is with us. 2020, the centennial of women's suffrage, is the year that will be remembered as the time when everyday Americans took to the streets, marched, raised their voices to challenge the status quo, and demanded a society that creates equal opportunity and shows dignity and respect for all. The torch from generations of struggle for gender and racial equality is what we carry into this day. We have a duty to honor the unsung heroes of the women's suffrage movement by voting this year. And we have a moral obligation to make the torch glow even brighter before we pass it on to the next generation. Finally, I want to commend you for creating this wonderful piece amidst a pandemic. Writing, rehearsing, filming, editing, everything entirely virtually. To share the power of these stories today on the 100th anniversary of the ratification of the 19th Amendment is a testament to the ingenuity and leadership of New York women. Congratulations again and enjoy.
Wasn't that amazing? Thank you, Lieutenant Governor Hochul, for that powerful and stirring message. It was such a pleasant surprise to hear from you. But wow, when I heard it the first time, I thought this is just. We were all in sync with thinking about things, but I can't imagine a more beautiful and better endorsement of what we're doing here tonight.
Yeah, I agree with every word. Oh my gosh, co-signed.
I mean,
co-signed.
that just reminded me, Melissa. Show us your amazing outfit because it has a history behind that too.
Oh, I have this awesome shirt called Wild Fang that makes some really awesome clothes for women, and this fabric has a bunch of buttons with political buttons and feminist buttons sort of printed onto it, which plus it's white, which was the suffragist color as well. So I was like, oh, it's like I bought it especially for this occasion, but I didn't. I've had it in my closet for a couple of years.
It's absolutely perfect. Oh my gosh. The Lieutenant Governor Hochul's message talked about, and we talked about earlier in this show too, the suppression of minority voices in this movement. As a woman of color yourself, Melissa, how was it like to, approach this piece, but also be hearing it and now be in the midst of this centenary commemoration?
It's complicated, right? It is a super complicated issue, and it's like I'm an Asian American, Asian Australian American, but also I have my own privileges. The people who are most oppressed in this country and have been oppressed for centuries, for generations upon generations, Black women and Indigenous women, and so. To me, it's like, as someone who grew up in a racist country, particularly racist against Asians, and then coming to America, I feel like, I have a moral duty to do whatever I can to speak out on the issue of racism, to, lift up other people of color who are working in mediums, to advocate for them, and to try to change the world for the better.
Right.
This is such a huge fight, and it's a marathon, not a sprint. We can't change everything overnight. It's a huge cultural shift, and it's happening. And it's a dangerous fight too, because there are backlashes that we have to deal with. There's people who don't want to change, and it's a massive seismic shift that's going on. I totally agree with Lieutenant Governor about that. It's happening right now, but we all have to be on board so that it doesn't just kind of sink back into complacency and continue on the path that we were on. So to me, it's like people sort of want to label me an activist, and I guess in some sense I'm speaking out on political issues, and maybe that makes me an activist, but I just feel like this is just morally what we are required to do at this moment as artists. So that's how I approach this.
Indeed. And without putting too fine a point, we are less than 80 days away from a very major election here in this country. So we
quite possibly one of the most important elections of the Republic. So
and for the world too, because there's an impact on everything, right?
Well, totally, yes. In Australia, as an Australian looking at American elections from afar, it was very much a case of, this affects all of us, actually. And, I know Americans are perhaps not in the habit of stepping up for other countries' interests. But also, we're talking about the world here. We're talking about a planet that's in danger, literally in danger from things like climate change. And
Indeed.
if we want to survive as a species with as little suffering as possible, we have to get on board. So, get out there and vote. It's
Indeed.
Your moral imperative.
Indeed it is. So we have a question here from Vanessa Robb, who goes, absolutely gorgeous. Thank you. Question, had that been performed live, would there have been the visual component? It was so powerful having them combined. Vanessa, actually, if this were an alternate reality and we're in a no COVID situation, it would probably just be a piece on the concert, and Melissa and Jacqueline would probably be in the audience, and we would acknowledge them and be really happy they were there for us. But it would just be one piece out of many pieces in a kind of a whole fabric of the whole program. So, while it was unfortunate that we couldn't do this live, but being able to do this in this medium gave us the opportunity to explore other media, like the visual components. A lot of the images you see were from the Library of Congress and archival footage, specifically of colored women who were involved in this movement too. So thank you for asking that question. But that actually also lets me to think for both you, Melissa, and Jacqueline, that this piece was conceived pre-COVID. So you were writing with the expectation of a live performance, and now we have this virtual performance with multimedia. Did this multimedia enhance the work for you? Did the final product deliver what you had conceived of originally, or did it go beyond that? Would you have preferred a live performance? What were your thoughts about that?
I think that they're totally different beasts, right? It's like two totally different genres. In some ways, it's like comparing a book and a movie, And so, yes, some people will prefer the book to the movie every single time, but the movie is also capable of reaching more people than the book usually, And it's like a totally different medium. And from your perspective, creating the video, it's a lot more time, a lot more effort, to put all of that together.
Indeed.
You have to, it's a lot more on top of, rehearsing a choir. Yes, I did not conceive of it as a film, but actually, I would love for every one of my choral works to be done as a music video like this, in some ways it's like I love the live experience, and the live experience is great for everyone in the room, but if you just put a camera in front of a live concert and then stick that video on YouTube, it doesn't have that great of an impact. You have to make something that's specifically made to be a video, which is what you did. I'm kind of like, I would like to not give up the live experience, but I would love to also have music videos be a thing in classical music, as they have been in pop music for about 40 or 50 years. So,
Exactly. I think having one of the silver linings of the pandemic, if I can even say that out loud, is that it has allowed us to explore new mediums that we wouldn't have really considered before, like these virtual performances that actually, in some odd ways, brings people together in a very easy way. Like we have people from all over the world watching this right now. We could have the two of you join us right now from the comfort of your home, right? And watching a performance like this gives you a new level of intimacy that you would never have in a big sort of audience concert hall like that. So. Ladies, it's so great to have you here. I think this is a perfect place for us to stop for the evening. I want to thank you both again for joining us, for being part of this broadcast, and also for this amazing work that you've given us with Set Myself Free. I'm so excited that this is now out to the world and that we can all share this continuously. And I look really forward to collaborating with you in the future with other projects, both you, Melissa, and you, Jacqueline, as well.
Yeah.
I also want to thank Lieutenant Governor Kathy Hochul for taking the time to deliver her beautiful message. Special thanks to our entire creative team, James Bilodeau, our audio engineer, Miguel LaCruz-Smith and Reham Ibrahim for the amazing videography, Marissa Biaggi for producing and spearheading this marketing and promotion of this event, as well as all the members of the Amuse board, Claire Malloy, Kathleen Mulready, Marissa Biaggi, and Esther Guerra, for your hard work and dedication not only to this project, but to the ensemble as well. But most of all, thank you to all of the singers, all 20 of you who gave your talent and time to learning and performing Set Myself Free. None of this would be possible without you and believing in this project. So thank you. Finally, and most importantly, please go out and vote. Vote on November 3rd. Vote early, vote by mail, vote in person. However you do it, go out and vote. Thank you, and have a good night.